"Ma'am, step back. This section isn't secure." The warning came too late, because the wind had already shifted, carrying the sharp metallic rattle across the half-finished structure, and before anyone else noticed, Maya Carter's head snapped upward toward the fourth-floor scaffolding where a loose steel beam trembled against its temporary brace, swaying just enough to send a chill through her chest. She dropped her measuring tape without thinking, her boots crunching over gravel as she moved fast across the concrete slab, the morning sun barely cutting through the pale Chicago haze. And down below, Daniel Whitmore stood near the edge of the construction platform, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a tablet as he listened to a project manager explaining timelines and budgets. His charcoal suit sharply out of place among dust-coated helmets and reflective vests, his polished shoes catching flecks of cement as he stepped forward to get a better look at the skyline, unaware that above him, the unsecured beam shifted. Again, groaning softly like a warning only a few could hear. Maya's pulse quickened as she calculated distance, angle, and timing the way she had learned after years on sites where caution meant everything. And she didn't hesitate. Not when the wind picked up again. Not when someone nearby started to turn, confused by the noise, because she had already seen enough, and she broke into a run, her orange vest catching the light as she closed the gap, her voice cutting through the hum of machinery. And distant traffic. "Sir, move, now." And Daniel turned, surprised, just as Maya reached him, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him 2 steps back, her grip firm but careful, and a second later the beam slipped from its temporary hold, dropping hard against a stack of lumber nearby with a loud clatter that echoed across the structure, sending a ripple of stunned silence across the crew. Dust floated in the air, sunlight breaking through it in thin golden lines, and Daniel blinked, his heart still, catching up to what had just happened, while Maya released his sleeve immediately, stepping back as if nothing unusual had occurred, brushing dust from her gloves with calm efficiency. The project manager rushed forward, voice tight with concern, but Daniel's focus remained on her, the young woman with deep brown skin and braided hair tucked beneath her hard hat, her expression steady, her posture composed, as though pulling a billionaire out of harm's way was just another task in a long workday. "You okay?" she asked simply, her tone practical, not dramatic, and Daniel nodded, still absorbing the moment, noticing the worn edges of her gloves, the scuffed toes of her boots, the quiet confidence in her eyes that didn't match the chaos that had just unfolded. "Yeah, I think I am," he replied, his voice softer than usual, and she gave a small nod, already turning back toward her tools, the sound of drills restarting around them, the rhythm of construction life resuming as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Daniel remained still for a second longer, watching her move across the slab with purposeful steps, her silhouette framed against the rising steel structure and the distant Chicago skyline. And something unfamiliar settled in his chest, not fear, not shock, but a quiet curiosity. Because in a world where people usually approached him with rehearsed confidence or calculated ambition, this woman had done neither. She had simply seen danger and acted, then returned to her work without expecting recognition. And as Daniel finally slipped his tablet back into his coat pocket, he realized that the morning's inspection had already become something else entirely. Because somewhere between the falling beam and her steady voice, a moment had formed that felt less like coincidence and more like the beginning of something he couldn't yet explain. The noise of the construction site slowly returned, forklifts humming, distant radios crackling, and boots echoing across unfinished concrete. Yet Daniel Whitmore remained unusually still, his attention following Maya Carter as she crossed the platform and bent to retrieve her measuring tape, her movements calm and practiced, as though the moment that had just unfolded carried no weight at all. He glanced at the project manager, who was already speaking quickly about safety checks and revised schedules, but Daniel barely heard the words, because something about her quiet composure lingered in his mind, and after a moment he stepped away from the group, walking across the slab with careful steps, his polished shoes now dulled by fine dust, until he stopped a few feet from her. Maya sensed him before he spoke, straightening slightly and adjusting her hard hat, her expression neutral but attentive. And Daniel cleared his throat softly, the wind tugging at the edge of his coat as he said, "I did not get a chance to thank you." His voice measured, yet warmer than usual, and she gave a small shrug, her brown eyes steady beneath the brim of her helmet. "It was nothing, sir, just part of the job," she replied, her tone respectful but not overly formal, and Daniel studied her for a second, noticing the faint smudge of dust along her sleeve, the worn patch on her vest, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself. "Still, you reacted faster than anyone else," he said, and she nodded slightly, glancing up toward the scaffolding as if already analyzing the next task. "You learn to listen to the sight," she answered simply. "It talks if you pay attention," and Daniel found himself unexpectedly intrigued by the way she described it, as if the steel and concrete had a rhythm only she understood. Nearby, a crane swung slowly against the skyline, sunlight reflecting off unfinished beams, and Maya turned back toward her measurements, kneeling to mark a line with a piece of chalk, her focus returning fully to her work. Yet Daniel remained standing there for another moment, as though reluctant to break the quiet. Finally he asked, "What is your name?" And she paused briefly before answering. "Maya Carter," her voice calm and direct, and he nodded, committing it to memory. "Daniel Whitmore," he said, though she already knew, like everyone else on site, and she gave a polite nod in acknowledgement without changing her posture, as if his title held little significance compared to the work in front of her. The simplicity of her response caught him off guard, because most people reacted differently when they realized who he was. But Maya simply returned to marking the chalk line, her movements precise, and after a second she added, "You should probably stay behind the marked area, sir. We are still securing that section." And Daniel almost smiled at the quiet authority in her voice, stepping back as instructed, the wind carrying the faint scent of fresh lumber and steel across the open structure. As he moved away, he glanced over his shoulder once more, watching her climb a short ladder with steady confidence, her boots landing firmly on each rung, and something about the contrast between her grounded presence and the towering city beyond stirred a quiet curiosity in him, because in a world built on numbers and negotiations, she seemed guided by instinct and responsibility. And as Daniel returned to the waiting group, the conversation about deadlines resumed, but his thoughts drifted back to the moment her voice had cut through the noise, and for the first time that morning, the towering construction project felt less like an investment and more like the place where an unexpected story had quietly begun. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the steel framework as Daniel Whitmore stepped into the back seat of his black SUV, the city of Chicago humming beyond the tinted windows, yet his mind remained anchored to the construction site, replaying the quiet steadiness in Maya Carter's voice and the way she had returned to work without hesitation. The vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic, the low murmur of the engine blending with distant horns and the faint rhythm of the city, while Daniel loosened his tie slightly, an unusual gesture that did not go unnoticed by Olivia Bennett seated across from him with her tablet balanced on her lap, her eyes lifting with quiet curiosity as she reviewed the day's schedule. "Your 3 o'clock call with the investors has been moved to 4, she said calmly, scrolling through notes, but Daniel did not immediately respond, his gaze drifting to the skyline outside, unfinished towers rising beside polished glass buildings, and after a moment he asked, "Who is Maya Carter?" His voice measured, yet thoughtful, and Olivia paused, slightly surprised by the question. "A construction worker on the Whitmore Tower project," she answered carefully, already searching through personnel records. "Do you need something specific?" And Daniel leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "She reacted quickly today. I would like to know more about her," he said, his tone calm, though Olivia sensed the subtle shift beneath his usual professional distance. She tapped lightly across the screen, the faint clicking sound filling the quiet space, then nodded. "Maya Carter, 28 years old, certified heavy equipment operator, also trained in site safety supervision. She has been with the subcontractor for nearly 3 years." Daniel listened silently, his attention sharpening. "No disciplinary issues," Olivia continued. "Consistent performance reviews. Often volunteers for overtime shifts." Daniel glanced toward her. "Overtime," he repeated, and Olivia nodded. "Yes, frequently double shifts, sometimes 6 days a week." The information settled quietly between them as the SUV slowed at a red light, sunlight reflecting across the polished dashboard. Daniel looked out again, picturing her steady movements, the worn gloves, the calm confidence, and he asked softly, "Any family information?" Olivia scanned further. Emergency contact listed as Ethan Carter, younger brother, currently in community college, part-time student. Daniel absorbed the detail, his expression thoughtful. No spouse listed. No dependents beyond the brother, Olivia added, then glanced up. She appears to keep a low profile. And Daniel nodded faintly, the city light shifting across his face as traffic resumed. Outside, pedestrians crossed busy intersections, their lives moving quickly in the afternoon rush. Yet Daniel found himself thinking about the contrast between boardrooms filled with polished presentations and a construction worker who listened to the language of steel and wind, and the thought lingered longer than expected. Olivia cleared her throat gently. "Would you like me to arrange a formal recognition?" she asked, accustomed to such requests after incidents. But Daniel shook his head slightly. "Not yet," he replied, his voice quiet. "Just make sure site safety reviews are completed." And Olivia nodded, noting the instruction, though she sensed that his interest was not purely procedural. The SUV turned onto a quieter avenue lined with tall glass buildings, sunlight fading into a softer glow as afternoon drifted toward evening, and Daniel leaned back, his thoughts returning once more to the moment Maya had said, "The site talks if you pay attention," a simple sentence that echoed in his mind with surprising clarity. And as the vehicle pulled toward the entrance of his corporate headquarters, he realized that among all the numbers and negotiations waiting upstairs, the most unexpected part of his day had come from a voice that cut through the noise of steel and wind, leaving behind a quiet curiosity that he could not easily set aside. The glass doors of Whitmore Global reflected the fading afternoon light as Daniel Whitmore stepped into the quiet elegance of the lobby, the polished marble floor echoing softly beneath his shoes while the receptionist greeted him with a respectful nod. Yet his thoughts still drifted back to the construction site, to the steady voice that had cut through the wind and dust hours earlier. The elevator ride to the top floor felt unusually long, the city unfolding below him through the glass walls, buildings stretching toward the horizon as the sky softened into early evening hues. And when the doors opened, the familiar calm of his executive floor greeted him, muted lighting, clean lines, and the quiet efficiency of assistants moving between offices. But something about the space felt different today, almost too polished, too distant from the grounded rhythm of steel and concrete. Daniel stepped into his office, setting his tablet down on the desk, while the city skyline filled the wide windows behind him, and Olivia Bennett followed moments later, placing a folder neatly at the corner of the desk. "Your investors are waiting in conference room A," she said calmly. Yet Daniel remained by the window for a second longer, watching a crane in the distance slowly rotate against the skyline, its movement reminding him of the sight earlier, of Maya Carter climbing the ladder with steady confidence. "Give me 5 minutes," he replied quietly, and Olivia nodded. Stepping back without question, Daniel loosened his cuff slightly, an unusual gesture for someone known for precision and routine, then turned toward his desk, glancing at the folder Olivia had left, though his attention drifted again to the city below, where construction cranes dotted the skyline like quiet sentinels of growth. 5 minutes later, he entered the conference room, where investors sat around a sleek table, their conversations pausing as he took his seat. Presentations began, charts appeared on screens, projections filled the air with numbers and timelines. Yet Daniel found his focus shifting unexpectedly, his mind returning to the calm steadiness of Maya's voice. And for a moment the discussion about profit margins felt distant compared to the grounded simplicity of someone who listened to the wind across steel. He quickly refocused, asking precise questions, reviewing figures, maintaining the composed authority expected of him. But even as the meeting concluded, the quiet curiosity remained. After the room cleared, Daniel returned to his office, where the evening light now cast warm reflections across the glass, and Olivia stepped in once more. "Your dinner meeting has been confirmed for 7, she said, then paused slightly, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, and Daniel gave a faint nod. "Yes, just thinking about the site," he replied, and Olivia nodded, understanding more than he realized, then left quietly. Daniel moved toward the window again, watching the city transition into evening. Headlights beginning to glow along distant streets, and he found himself picturing Maya finishing her shift, the rhythm of boots across concrete, the quiet determination in her posture. And something about that image felt grounding in a way his usual routine rarely did. As the lights of Chicago flickered on one by one, Daniel realized that the day had shifted something subtle within him, not dramatic, not immediate, but quiet and persistent, like the steady hum of construction far below. And for the first time in a long while, he felt an unexpected pull toward a place defined not by boardrooms or contracts, but by steel beams, open sky, and a voice that had cut through the wind with calm certainty. The next morning arrived with a pale gray sky stretching across Chicago, the early light reflecting softly off the rising steel structure of Whitmore Tower as workers gathered one by one, their breath faintly visible in the cool air, and Maya Carter adjusted her gloves while reviewing a clipboard near the edge of the platform, her focus steady as forklifts hummed to life and distant traffic blended into the background rhythm of the city. She moved carefully along the marked lines, checking measurements from the previous day, her boots echoing lightly against unfinished concrete, and above her the crane rotated slowly, cables swaying gently in the morning breeze, while nearby a younger worker struggled with a stack of lightweight panels that shifted slightly each time the wind brushed across the open structure. Maya noticed immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Hold on. Let me help you steady that," she said, placing one gloved hand against the edge to guide the panels into alignment. The movement smooth and practiced, and the young worker exhaled in relief. "Thanks, I thought I had it," he admitted, and Maya gave a small nod. "Wind picks up faster up here. You just have to watch the direction," she replied, stepping back once the panels were secured, her tone gentle yet confident. At the far end of the site, a black SUV rolled to a quiet stop, its polished surface reflecting the steel framework above, and Daniel Whitmore stepped out, his coat catching the morning breeze as he paused briefly, taking in the familiar sounds of construction, the distant clang of metal, the quiet coordination of movement, and something about the scene felt grounding, different from the polished stillness of his office. He walked across the gravel path, his attention naturally drawn toward Maya as she continued her work, her movement steady, her focus fully absorbed in the rhythm of the site, and Daniel slowed slightly, observing the way she checked a measurement, then stepped aside to allow a forklift to pass, her awareness of the space instinctive and calm. As he approached, she glanced up, recognizing him immediately, though her expression remained composed. "Good morning," she said simply, her voice steady beneath the hum of machinery, and Daniel nodded. "Good morning, Maya," he replied, the sound of her name feeling unexpectedly natural, and she tilted her head slightly. "Back for another inspection?" she asked, and he gave a faint smile. "Something like that," he answered, watching as she tucked the clipboard under her arm and stepped aside to mark another line with chalk. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of fresh lumber and steel, and Maya adjusted her hard hat, glancing upward briefly before returning to her work, and Daniel found himself standing there a moment longer than necessary, noticing the quiet determination in her posture, the effortless confidence in her movements, and after a second he asked, "You start early?" And she nodded. "Earlier shift means fewer delays," she replied, brushing chalk dust from her gloves. "Helps keep everything on schedule." And Daniel looked around the site, watching workers move in. Coordinated rhythm, then back to Maya, realizing that while numbers and timelines filled his reports, here they lived in real movement and steady hands. A crane cable tightened overhead, sunlight breaking through the clouds in thin golden lines, and Maya stepped aside to allow a crew to pass, her awareness precise, and Daniel felt that same quiet curiosity returning, the sense that the construction site held a rhythm he had not fully understood before. And as the morning continued to unfold, the steady hum of work and the calm presence of Maya Carter created a moment that felt both ordinary and quietly significant, like the beginning of something still taking shape beneath steel beams and open sky. The morning light grew brighter as the construction site settled into a steady rhythm, the distant hum of machinery blending with the sound of boots crossing unfinished concrete, and Daniel Whitmore remained near the edge of the marked area, observing the coordinated movement of workers. While Maya Carter moved with quiet efficiency, checking measurements and guiding a small team adjusting a row of steel supports, her voice calm and clear as she spoke. "Shift that 2 inches left, keep it steady." And the workers responded without hesitation, trusting her judgment, while Daniel noticed how naturally she commanded attention without raising her voice, her authority built on experience rather than position. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber across the platform, and Maya stepped back, reviewing the alignment with careful eyes before giving a small nod of approval. Then she turned and spotted Daniel still standing nearby, her expression softening slightly with polite acknowledgement. "You are getting used to the noise yet?" she asked, and Daniel allowed a faint smile. "I think I am starting to," he replied, glancing across the rising structure, sunlight reflecting softly off the steel beams, and Maya followed his gaze. "It looks different every day," she said quietly. "That is my favorite part." And Daniel nodded, realizing he rarely watched things grow gradually. Most of his work focused on outcomes rather than process. Nearby, a forklift rolled past slowly, and Maya stepped aside, her awareness instinctive. Then she reached for her thermos resting on a nearby beam, taking a brief sip before setting it back down, and Daniel noticed the simple stainless steel container, slightly scratched from long use, contrasting with the polished coffee cups, usually waiting in his office. "You have been doing this a long time," he said, and she shrugged lightly. "Long enough to know when a site feels right," she answered, her tone thoughtful. Then she added, "This one does." And Daniel looked around again, seeing the structure from her perspective, the open sky above, the city stretching beyond, and the quiet determination of the workers shaping steel and concrete into something lasting. A distant horn sounded from the street below, and Maya checked her watch briefly, then picked up her clipboard again. But before stepping away, she glanced back at Daniel. "You should stand a little farther from the edge when the crane starts lifting," she advised gently, and Daniel nodded, stepping back as instructed, the quiet authority in her voice surprisingly reassuring. Moments later, the crane cable tightened, lifting a beam slowly into position, and Maya watched carefully, her eyes following the movement while guiding a worker with small hand signals, her calm presence grounding the moment. And Daniel found himself watching her instead of the beam, noticing the way she anticipated each movement before it happened, her posture steady against the breeze, and as the beam settled into place, the crew relaxed slightly, the site returning to its steady rhythm. Maya made a quick note on her clipboard, then turned toward another section, her boots moving with quiet confidence. And Daniel realized that the more he observed her, the more he understood the unspoken language she had described, the rhythm of wind, steel, and timing. And as the morning continued, the rising structure felt less like a distant investment and more like a living project shaped by steady hands and quiet determination. And somewhere within that rhythm, Daniel felt an unexpected sense of calm, as if the towering steel around them was not only building a skyline, but also quietly reshaping something within him. The late morning sun climbed higher above the skyline, casting bright reflections across the steel framework as the construction site moved with steady momentum. And Daniel Whitmore remained near the observation line, watching as Maya Carter guided another team preparing for the next lift, her voice calm and measured. "Keep the line tight, slow and steady." And the crew responded with quiet confidence, trusting her judgment without hesitation, while the crane operator adjusted the cable, lifting a long beam gradually into position. A soft wind swept across the open structure, carrying the distant sounds of Chicago traffic far below, and Maya stepped forward slightly, her eyes scanning the movement with practiced focus, her posture steady as she watched the beam rise. And Daniel noticed how she seemed to anticipate each shift before it happened, her attention fixed on the subtle movements of steel and cable. Nearby, a worker struggled briefly with a loose guide rope that drifted in the breeze, and Maya moved quickly but calmly, reaching out to help steady the line, her voice gentle yet firm. "You have got it, just hold the angle." And the rope stabilized, the beam aligning smoothly into place, while Daniel felt a quiet admiration growing as he observed her calm leadership. When the beam settled, the crew relaxed slightly, and Maya made a small note on her clipboard, then stepped back, brushing dust from her gloves. her breathing even as though the moment required no extra effort. Daniel walked a few steps closer, careful to remain within the safe zone she had previously marked, and she glanced toward him, offering a small, polite smile. "Everything looks good," she said, and Daniel nodded. "You make it look easy," he replied, and she gave a quiet shake of her head. "It is never easy, just familiar," she answered, her tone thoughtful, and Daniel considered her words, realizing that her confidence came not from simplicity, but from experience shaped by countless careful decisions. The sunlight brightened across the platform, and Maya adjusted her hard hat slightly, glancing upward as another crane movement began, her awareness constant, and Daniel followed her gaze, noticing the rhythm she had described, the quiet conversation between wind, steel, and timing. After a moment she stepped aside, allowing a small team to pass, and Daniel noticed the respectful nods they gave her, subtle acknowledgments of trust, and something about that quiet respect felt different from the formal deference he experienced in boardrooms. The breeze softened, and Maya reached for her thermos again, taking a brief sip before setting it down. Then she turned back toward Daniel. "You are spending more time here than most executives," she observed gently, and he allowed a faint smile. "I am learning," he replied, and she nodded, her expression warm but reserved. "It is a good place to learn patience," she said, and Daniel looked across the structure once more, watching workers moving in. Coordinated rhythm, the skyline stretching beyond, and he realized she was right. The site demanded attention, timing, and quiet trust, qualities that rarely appeared in financial reports. A distant siren echoed faintly across the city, blending into the steady hum of construction, and Maya returned to her clipboard, her boots moving with quiet certainty as she guided another measurement. And Daniel found himself standing there longer again, drawn by the grounded calm she carried. And as the morning continued, the rising structure seemed to reflect more than steel and concrete. It reflected a quiet connection forming in small moments, steady and unspoken, like the slow lift of a beam finding its place beneath the open Chicago sky. The sun had moved higher, warming the steel beams as the construction site settled into the steady rhythm of midday, and the distant skyline shimmered faintly under the bright Chicago light, while Maya Carter walked along the marked path, reviewing measurements, her boots echoing softly against the unfinished concrete, and Daniel Whitmore remained nearby, his attention following her movements as workers adjusted cables and forklifts rolled slowly across the platform. A light breeze swept through the open structure, carrying the scent of fresh lumber and distant city air, and Maya paused near a support column, crouching briefly to check a bolt alignment, her gloved hands moving with practiced precision before she stood again, brushing dust from her vest, and Daniel stepped closer, careful to remain within the safe boundaries she had established earlier, his coat shifting gently in the wind. She noticed him and offered a small nod, her expression calm. "You are still here," she said, her tone warm but simple, and Daniel gave a faint smile. "I had a few hours before my next meeting," he replied, glancing across the structure as sunlight reflected off the rising steel, and Maya followed his gaze. "It looks different when the sun is high," she said, quietly. "You can see how everything connects," and Daniel nodded, noticing how the beams formed patterns against the sky, something he had rarely taken time to observe before. Nearby, a worker struggled briefly to align a measurement tape stretched across a long span, and Maya stepped forward, holding one end steady while offering calm guidance. "Keep it level, just like that." And the worker adjusted, the tape settling into place, and she gave a small nod before stepping back, her movements smooth and unhurried, while Daniel watched the quiet confidence in her actions, the way she helped without drawing attention. After a moment she returned to his side, resting her clipboard lightly against her arm, and Daniel asked, "Do you always stay this focused?" And she considered the question briefly, her eyes moving across the structure. "You have to," she answered. "The site depends on it." And Daniel absorbed her words, recognizing the quiet responsibility she carried without needing recognition. The breeze softened, and Maya reached for her thermos again, offering a small sip before placing it back. Then she glanced toward Daniel. "You ever worked somewhere like this before?" she asked gently, and he shook his head slightly. "Not like this," he replied. Most of my work happens behind glass. And she gave a faint smile. Steel and open sky change how you think, she said. And Daniel looked around again. Realizing she was right, the openness, the sound of movement, the steady pace all felt grounding in a way his office rarely did. A crane began lifting another beam slowly, the cable tightening with a quiet hum, and Maya instinctively stepped forward, her attention shifting to guide the movement, her posture steady against the breeze, while Daniel stood back, watching her coordinate the placement with small hand signals, her calm presence guiding the crew. When the beam settled smoothly, the site returned to its steady rhythm, and Maya exhaled quietly, making a small note on her clipboard, then turned back toward Daniel. Her expression relaxed, and he realized that the hours had passed quickly, carried by the rhythm of the site and the quiet conversations between them. And as sunlight reflected across the steel and the city stretched beyond, Daniel felt the same quiet pull growing stronger. The sense that these simple moments beneath open sky were shaping something meaningful, steady and unspoken, like the slow rise of the tower itself against the Chicago horizon. The afternoon light softened as the sun drifted westward, casting long golden reflections across the steel framework, while the construction site eased into the quieter rhythm that often followed midday. And Maya Carter moved along the platform reviewing final measurements for the shift, her boots steady against the concrete as distant city traffic blended with the hum of machinery, while Daniel Whitmore remained nearby, watching the skyline stretch beyond the rising tower, the breeze gentler. Now, carrying warmth instead of the cool morning air, Maya paused near the edge of the marked boundary, checking a final alignment before making a note on her clipboard. Then she looked up and noticed Daniel still standing there, her expression calm but slightly curious. "You have been here almost the entire day," she said softly, and Daniel glanced at his watch as if surprised by the passing hours, then offered a faint smile. "I did not realize how quickly time moves here," he replied. And Maya followed his gaze toward the skyline, the late afternoon sun painting the buildings in warm tones. "That happens," she said quietly. "You start paying attention to the little things, and the day just moves with the work." And Daniel nodded, understanding what she meant. The steady rhythm of the site had shifted his usual sense of time. Nearby, a crew began packing up equipment, the soft clatter of tools, and the hum of a forklift signaling the approaching end of the shift, and Maya stepped aside to guide a worker carrying a set of measurements, her voice calm and reassuring. "Watch your step near the line." And the worker nodded, adjusting his path, while Daniel noticed how naturally she cared for the safety of everyone around her, her awareness constant even as the day wound down. The sunlight dipped lower, reflecting off the crane cables, and Maya rested her clipboard against a beam for a moment, stretching her shoulders slightly before turning back toward Daniel. "Do you come back often?" she asked gently, and he considered the question, looking across the unfinished structure, the skyline glowing softly beyond. "I think I might," he replied, his tone thoughtful, and she gave a small, warm smile, not surprised, just acknowledging the quiet shift in his words. A light breeze moved through the open structure, lifting a strand of her braided hair slightly beneath her hard hat, and Daniel noticed the quiet calm in her presence, the grounded steadiness that seemed to shape the space around her. And for a moment neither of them spoke, simply watching the city transition toward evening, the distant buildings catching the last light of the day. A foreman called out that the shift was ending, and workers began heading toward the stairwell, their voices relaxed, the tension of the day easing, and Maya picked up her thermos and clipboard, preparing to leave, but before stepping away she glanced back at Daniel. "Have a good evening," she said softly, and Daniel nodded. "You too, Maya," he replied, the sound of her name steady and natural. She turned and walked toward the stairwell, her boots echoing lightly as the sun dipped lower behind the skyline, and Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, watching her silhouette move across the steel framework, the warm light surrounding the unfinished tower, and he realized that what began as an ordinary inspection had quietly turned into something more meaningful, a connection built not through grand moments, but through steady conversations, calm presence, and shared time beneath open sky. And as the final light of the afternoon faded across the Chicago skyline, Daniel Whitmore felt an unexpected sense of anticipation for tomorrow, as if the rising tower was not only shaping the city, but quietly shaping his own path as well.